Hello, and welcome to A Quest for Games. I'm Jerry, and in this video, we're going to talk about and learn to play the 1 to 5 player, or if you have the expansion, 7-player game, Scythe. The expansion I'm talking about is the Invaders from Afar. They'll allow you to put 2 more factions in the game, which the main board's already set up for those 2 extra factions. It just gives you the parts for those 2 extra factions. So what is Scythe? Well, Scythe is set in a time after a big war has happened, and what they refer to as the city-state of the factory, which produced mechs to help fuel this war, has shut its doors. And now we're in a 1920s Eastern Europa alternate timeline that there are 5 to 7 factions that are now trying to figure out what happened and how to gain a foothold for their empire and make themselves the strongest empire that's out right now. So with that, the object of the game is to earn as much money as you possibly can. There is combat in the game, but for the most part, when I've played it, there's little to no combat that goes on. It's mostly trying to gain territory, control territory, and get resources to be able to do more things to be able to improve your empire. So with that, here's the normal. I've paid for this game. I bought it. This one's not a Kickstarter, but I'm not sponsored. Any opinions you hear in this are mine and mine alone. This was not an evaluation copy. If you like what I'm doing here, I'd appreciate it if you'd like the video and or subscribe to my channel. And with that said, let's get it to the table and start to teach. Hello, and welcome to the table. I am going to show you, just so that you can see how this board looks. There are 2 sides to the main board. This is the extension, and this is how big the board becomes when you add that extension to the board. On the other side of this board is the normal size board. So let's flip this over to kind of try to let you see. There's the difference in the size. And then this is what the base game comes with. I'm going to use this board for the teach because I can get it pretty much all on camera. Although I'm expecting that I'll have to zoom into some spaces and some cards. But this is what I'll use. I just wanted to let you see when you get the base game, if you're interested, you'll see that there's another side to this board. And if you're trying to figure out which side to set up, the side that actually has the tracks on it this is the side you need to have set up. So if you were going to ask me, do I need this bigger board? I will tell you that you can play with 7 players on this board. It's easier with the bigger board to play with a higher player count. 2 players on this board, 3 players on this board, I've had no problems. The 7 players, if you have Invaders from Afar, 7 players get a little tight. And here's what I mean by that. Here's one space that if I have 2 mechs from one faction and 1 mech from another faction, that space is pretty well taken up. If I'm supposed to be trying to put my troops in there and I have any kind of resources or anything in there, it gets a little tight. And that's only 2 players in the same space. So that's an advantage of having this bigger board, is there's one of the squares from the bigger board, and I have my 3 mechs in there, and there's still plenty of room to add regular troops and resources or whatever else. With that out of the way, let's get started with setup. So now we're going to start setting up the main board. The first thing we have to do to set up the main board is we have to take these encounter tokens and set them on each one of the spaces that has the same symbol, this little green compass. So we have to set it on a space that has the same symbol as that encounter token. And you shouldn't have any encounter tokens left when you're finished setting that up. Okay, so after you set up the encounter tokens, you need to set up resources and put them out in a spot where everybody can reach them. I'm putting them into these containers, and and they'll be off camera here, but you have wood, you have oil, you have food, and you have metal. Set those up in containers, and I'm going to put them right here off camera, but I have them in these containers so that I can pull them back on camera if necessary. These are the combat cards. You have to give those a shuffle and then put them on the spot right here on the board where it shows the combat cards back. These are the factory cards. You shuffle the factory cards up and then you deal out 1 plus the number of players. So we're going to set up for a 2-player game, so I need 3 cards. And you put those over here on the factory spot. These are the objective cards. You shuffle those up and put them right here on the objective spot. These are the encounter cards. You shuffle up the encounter cards and you put them into this spot right here on the corner. I'm sorry, part of it's off camera, but you put them right into that corner spot. Then you will shuffle up these tiles and you'll see that they are thick cardboard tiles, which are called the structure bonus tiles. And you pick one and you put it in this spot right here at the bottom of the track. Then the rules say you should shuffle these up and pass out 1 faction board to each player. This is the Saxons faction board. I generally allow people to pick their own faction, and if there's a dispute, then we do the whole random thing. The next thing you're supposed to do is shuffle up these player boards and pass one of them out to each player, which I did. I passed out 1 to the Saxons and 1 to the Nordic. Then we have to go set those up. I'm going to show you how I've got, or what we have to do to set up the Nordic factions board. You have all those stars. The stars go on the board. They're just set up here on the board. You have your mechs. 1 mech goes onto each circle. Right here, you'll see that it tells me to set up my power at level 4. So I set my power token at level 4. It tells me I'm supposed to take 1 combat card. So I took 1 combat card. The number of combat cards that I have is public knowledge, but what the actual value of the combat card is not supposed to be public knowledge. So that set up the faction board itself. Then I went and set up my player board. And on my player board, I set up 1 technology cube for each one of the spaces. All 6 of the technology cubes went out. I put 6 workers out into these spots. I put each one of the structures into their spots. Then I put each one of the recruits into their spot. And I will place my action token next to the board. The reason you put it next to the board instead of on one of the spots on the board is because you can never repeat the same action that was taken last time. And this is going to mark what action did I take the last time. So you set this next to the board. You'll see right here on the board, it says I'm supposed to take 2 of the objective cards. So I drew 2 objective cards. I'm supposed to have a popularity of 4, so I put my heart on the 4. I'm supposed to have 7 gold, so I took 7 gold. And now this board is finished, is set up. Each player will have to do the same thing, following the same rules. So the Saxons board here, they got a different player board, and it says they're supposed to get 2 cards, but they only have a popularity of 2. And they only get 5 gold. There's one more thing that I need to show you that's on these cards. And I'm not sure how well you can see it, but there's a little 2. There's a little 2 right there on the corner of this board, right in that same box that says engineering. The person who has the engineering player board will go second. That's what the 2 means. The board that the Nordic chose is agriculture, and they go 5th, or they're 5, which will be important when we start to play. So then I have to set my figure on my faction spot, and I put 1 worker. There's 2 left over. I put 1 worker on each one of the land accessible spots. And just to make it so that you can see it closer, there's the Saxons figure, and I can put it on 1 of each of the land accessible spots. I don't know how well you can see it, but this is not a space. It's not a hexagon. So those are the only ones accessible to me. If I had chose the Chimera, well, that's a lake, so that's not land. So I can only put my 2 workers on these spaces. So you'll see that each one of the faction spaces only has 2 that they can get, 2 land spaces they can get to from their home base. Then we hand out 1 of these player aids to each person, and we hand out 1 of these aids they call the Riverwalk, which allows you to understand which factions can Riverwalk. We have to set up the combat boards, or put them nearby, not set them up, but we have to put the combat boards nearby. And I now have the Nordics set up and ready to play. I will do the same thing to set up the Saxons. So I pulled the Saxons board up on camera so you can see them, but I did the same thing to set them up. They had a power of 1, so I put their power on the 1, but they got 4 combat cards, so I gave them 4 combat cards. I have all their mechs out onto their spaces on their mechs, and they have their stars on this board the way they're supposed to be on their faction board. I gave them 2 objective cards because their board says 2 objective cards. Their popularity is set to 2 because that's what that's set up for. They got 5 gold because the board says 5 gold. I have all their people, their workers set up here. Their tech cubes are all set out. Their buildings are all set out. Their recruits are all set out. Their faction leader is set out, and their 2 workers are set out onto the board. And we are ready for a 2-player game. Okay, so let's start talking about how you play the game. There's a few other ground rules that we have to go over before we actually start into the main rules. But this is your home base. The home base, no one can attack there. Nobody else but your faction can be on the home base. These 2 territories are territories that are considered controlled by the Saxons because there are workers or military units like their mech or their leader are in those spaces. So those are considered controlled by the Saxons. In the Nordics example, it's the same thing. These 2 are controlled by Nordic. If you have people on a hex, it is considered that you control it. If there's a mixture of people, you're going to have a battle. And then you'll notice on each one of the hexes that there is a resource type. On most of the hexes, there's a resource type. When you take the action of produce, you will produce resources on your hex. Another one of the basic concepts is is military units. So these workers are not considered military units. They do not participate in a fight. Your leader and your mechs are military units, and they do participate in the fights. But the wooden meeples are your workers. The plastic pieces are your military units. Before we start talking about how you actually play each round, let's talk about the global view of how do I win this game. Well, how you win the game is you have the most coins at the end of the game. And it's not just the most coins you have when the game ends, it's the most coins at the end of the game. So there are certain things that happen due to the game ending. You'll get some things from the popularity track, you'll get some structural bonuses and other things like that. So whoever has the most money at the end of the game wins the game. Since I'd said you win the game by having the most money, well, how does the game end? Well, the game ends by somebody having 6 stars on this track. There were the stars that you had that we placed on your faction board. When you achieve certain goals, you will get a star put into that spot. So one example is if you ever get your popularity up here to 18, you get to put a star in. I had 18 popularity. So there are different things that happen here that cause you to be able to get a star. As soon as someone has 6 stars out here somewhere, the game ends and you do final game scoring, which I'll talk about when we get to that point. The person with the most money is the winner. for my first turn, and I would go second because my number's 5th, so the Saxons would have went first. But on your turn, you'll take your action marker and put it onto one of these spaces on your player board. Once on one turn, if you took this action, the next turn, I couldn't take this action again. I'd have to take one of these other actions. So that's why in the beginning, we started our pawn off to the side. So let's go through each one of these one at a time, going from left to right. If I took this first action, I'm just moving this to get it out of the way. I would be able to take the action on the top and on the bottom of my player board. They're optional. I can take either one, or I can only take one, or I can take both. The first action on this agricultural board is move or gain. So in move or gain, you can move your character 2 spaces, or you can gain 1 gold. So let's talk about moving 2 spaces. I could move this worker, and actually, because I am the Nordic, my workers can swim. So my workers can swim across the water, and I could move my worker 1 space across the water, and I would be able to pull the resources with them. And I can pull as many resources as I have. I can pull different kinds of resources. If I got a wood and a food, I can pull both of those with me. I could pull, if I had 4 things here, I could pull all of them. It doesn't really matter. My worker would just pull the resources with them as they went along. This one could do the same. I could move this one 1 and this one 1 because I have 2 movement points. I could move my leader 2 spaces, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to move my leader the 2 spaces that I can move because I got 2 movement. My leader winds up on the space that's got an explorer tile. This tile is still there, so the tile would be removed, and I would collect an exploration card, and I have to do what the exploration card, I have to pick something from the exploration card and do what it says. So in this case, the exploration card shows this mech up here and some pigs and a house, a farm. So my first option would be I can repair the broken fence and secure the pigs. If I do that, I gain 2 food and I gain 1 popularity. I can dismantle the mech for spare parts. If I do that, I have to pay 2 gold and I gain 3 resources of my choice. And the last one is I can startle the pigs and start a stampede. And I would have to pay 2 popularity, but I would gain 1 worker and 3 metal. So I think I'm going to choose the gain popularity and 2 resources. I get the 2 food. So I'll get the 2 food from that. And I put the 2 food, I have to put the 2 food with one of my workers. So let's just say I'm putting the 2 food with this worker, because whenever you gain anything, they got to be gained by a worker. So that worker got the 2 food. I could have split the food up and said each worker gained 1 food, or this worker gains 2 food, whichever way I want to do that. And then I'd get 1 popularity. So I would move my heart up 1 on the popularity track. When it said pay 2 popularity, if I chose to do that, I would have to pay 2 popularity. And I would actually get another worker that I'd be able to put out on the board, but I'm going to gain the 1 popularity and take the 2 food. While I'm at movement, though, a couple other things. If I happen to have a mech out here, that mech can transport this person and all of the resources, as many people and resources as I want to wherever I want to transport them to, based on how the mech can move. For this particular faction, I can't move this mech into this area, like a village, because my Riverwalk, if I had Riverwalk available, wouldn't let me move there. But I could take this mech with all its people and move them up here. All the workers and everybody would move. And that doesn't count as a movement point for the worker. It's just 1 movement point for the mech. Everything got loaded onto my mech to be moved. If I moved into an area that had an opposing faction, that would start combat. And I'm going to talk about combat in a minute, but I don't want to talk about that one right now. I'm just going to finish some of the movement stuff. If my worker wanted to move over here it couldn't move over here, even though it can cross the river, because there's an opposing faction military unit over here. It also couldn't move over here if there was just a worker there. If there was a worker there, it couldn't move over into this space because of the worker that's there. If there was just a building or a structure over here that didn't have any of their people around it, if there was a person here, they still couldn't move because of the worker. If there's no worker, if this structure is just over here by itself, I could move into that area with that structure. And I now control this space. And while I'm talking about movement and I happen to have a tunnel here, the tunnels, it considers all tunnel spaces that you can see on the board, which you can't see one here, but there's one there. There's one underneath the board here. There's one underneath the board here. All these tunnel spaces, including one that's built because the tunnel was built here, are considered adjacent. So as one movement point, I could move that person and that worker and their resources all the way up to this space up here in one turn, in one movement point, because these tunnels are considered connected. So I think other than combat, that kind of covers everything. This is a lake. People can't move across lakes. There is seaworthy for one of your mechs, for one of the mech powers that can happen, that will allow you to move your leader and your mechs across lakes, but that's a power that you get when you unlock one of your mechs. Okay, so that covers movement. So let's move on down to the bottom of this one. This is an upgrade. I could pay 2 oil if I happen to have oil. I don't have it, but if I had 2 oil, I would take those 2 oil, let's say that was here. I would take the 2 oil off of that worker, or if I had an oil here and an oil here, I could take an oil from here and an oil from here. Doesn't matter, as long as I'm taking it from a place where I have a worker or one of my people. I take those 2 oil, I put them back in the resource supply, and now I can do an upgrade. So what an upgrade is I can take any one of these technology cubes, any one of the 6. So I could take this one from here, and I could move it over here and say that my mech is now only going to take me 3 metal to build, as opposed to the 4 metal that it was going to take just a second ago. And then I would also get 1 gold for doing that. If I could do the upgrade, I would get 1 gold for doing the upgrade. If I can't do the upgrade, which I really can't because I don't have the right resources to do that, then I would just pass and not do anything. But you also will now see that because I have this opened, now I can produce on 3 spaces as opposed to just producing on the normal 2 spaces. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If I would have taken it from here, it probably would have made more sense to us. I can now move 3 spaces or 3 movement points as opposed to just the 2 movement points. And then this cube would go somewhere, one of these down here. So that's the first one. The second one, if I went to this space, I could pay 1 gold, so I'd be paying 1 gold, and I would be able to get 2 resources of my choice. So I'm going to take 2 metal for paying that 1 gold, right? I paid the 1 gold, I'll leave it there. I paid the 1 gold, I get 2 resources of my choice, or I could have paid the 1 gold and I could have moved 1 up on the popularity track, which you can't see right now, but I showed you that on the last one. So that's the trade action. And while I'm on the square and we're looking at this structure, you can see underneath the structure what happens. So this is an armory. If I built that armory and I had it sitting on a space, if I had an armory, anytime I did a trade action, I would get 1 more power on this board. So I would move my marker up 1 on the power board. And again, this one, if I ever get my power up to 16, then I get to put a star up on the board. One of the 6 things that I can do to cause an end game to happen. I did my trade action. So in the bottom part of this, I could pay 3 metal, because I put this in here, it's only 3. It would have been 4 before. I could pay 3 metal and deploy 1 mech. These spaces on the bottom are a little different based on the board that was randomly selected for you. As an example, in this one, the deploy action always only costs 3. And if I had upgraded it, it would only cost me 2. So be careful about what you're doing with those. I would have to pay 3 metal. I don't have the 3 metal, so I can't do this. But let's just say I happen to have 3 metal. I would take the 3 metal from somebody, whoever had them, whichever workers or whatever had the metal. I would have to take the 3 metal. I could then deploy a mech. So let's talk about what happens when you deploy a mech. For the mech, at least for the Nordic, these are your powers. There's a few other powers, and I'll talk to them in a minute. But the Nordic, if I picked the mech that was on this space, I would get Riverwalk, and I would be able to Riverwalk into wooded areas and into mountains. And it shows you the resource of a log or metal. With the Riverwalk, if I was trying to go from this space to this space, which is an oil or an oil field, I couldn't do that with the Riverwalk that the Nordics have. If I was a Chimera, I could do that. And you can look at this. You could look at the Riverwalk player's aid, and it'll tell you who can do what with the Riverwalk. But mech could not Riverwalk into here. It could Riverwalk into here because that's a mountain. Or if I happened to be here, I could Riverwalk to here because it's a forest. So if I was taking that one, I could deploy my mech. I'd have to deploy my mech into one of the 2 spaces that have a worker already. I couldn't deploy it into this space with no worker. I couldn't deploy it into this space, which has my faction leader. I have to deploy it into a space with one of my 2 workers. So let's go through the rest of these spaces here. If I had picked the mech, so your mechs are sitting on the board like this, right? This is how we set them up. All my mechs are sitting down here. As I pick the mech up, I get that special power, right? So if I pick this one up, for the Nordic, I get seaworthy. So I can now traverse through this lake. This has got the symbol of a lake on it. I can now take my mech and he can traverse through the lake. This one, if I played 1 power, my opponent has to pay 2 power in a combat, which we'll talk about that in a little bit. And if I took this one, I would gain 1 extra movement, the speed. So whenever I took a move turn, instead of just getting 2 movement, I would get 3. If I had this upgrade done, I would get, instead of getting the 3, I would get 4 speed. So I'd get 4 movement points or 3 movement points based on where this is and if I took that. So I talked a little bit about the Riverwalk ones, that each faction's Riverwalk is a little bit different. The Saxons in their space underneath the 1 mech, their special ability is they can move from any space that's got metal on it as if it's a tunnel. So they could move from this space to this space as if there's a tunnel there. That's what one of the additional abilities of the Saxons are, their special ability. Okay, so that covers deploying mechs and what special abilities you get on your mech and on your leader for deploying a mech. Let's move on to production. So the next space over is production. And in production, you pay whatever this is telling you to pay at the top. In the beginning, you're paying nothing. You have to wind up paying when you get far enough over. You're paying power, or you're paying popularity, or you're paying gold, depending upon how far along you are in putting workers out there. So I can produce at first I can produce on any 2 spaces, but because I upgraded this one, I can now produce on 3 spaces that I have workers. So I'm going to produce, I get to produce on 3 different tiles, or I could produce on 1 tile twice. So this worker, I'm going to produce on this worker, I'll get 1 wood for producing on that tile. I'm going to produce for this worker, so I'll get one oil for producing for that worker. But let's go talk about what the other tiles that I could produce on would be like. Let's just say instead of
when I started that production turn, my worker was here. Well, this is a town space. So the town space, I produce a worker. In towns, you produce workers. So that's how I get workers off of this board and how I get more workers running around. So let's just say this is what I actually had. And when I did my production, I was going to produce in 3 spaces. I could produce 1 oil here, I could produce 1 wood there, and I would produce 1 worker here, trying to give you all the possible combinations of things. Let's say instead of it being that way, I did it this way, and I happen to have 2 workers here. When I produced on this tile, I would produce 2 wood because there's 2 workers there. I would produce 1 wood for each worker. If I had 3 workers there, I'd produce 3 wood because I have 3 workers in the same space. So each worker you have in the tile when you produces one of the resources that that tile would produce. In this space over here, I would produce food because it's a field and it shows you the little food symbol. Lakes don't produce anything. The home base doesn't produce anything. The factory, which is up here underneath here, the factory is a special tile, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But the factory doesn't produce anything either. It's a special tile. So having 2 people produces 2. If I happen to have this windmill out here in this space, I would automatically also produce 1 more wood because the windmill will produce 1 more good of the space. If I had moved these workers over here, if I produced now, I would still get that resource for that 1 windmill. Okay, so that's what the windmill building does. It'll produce 1 resource of the type that that tile produces when you do a production. All right, then for their bottom action down here, their bottom action is build, and that's how we build these structures. And I would have to pay 4 wood right now to build 1 structure. So I don't have that, but I would be able to build 1 structure and I would get 2 gold for building that structure. So let's talk about, we already talked about what the mine does. It basically becomes a tunnel, right? And we talked about what the armory does. It will give you more power every time you do a trade action. The windmill produces an extra production, and the monument gives you popularity. Whenever you do a bolster, whenever I do a bolster, which I haven't gotten a bolster yet, but whenever I do a bolster, I'll get more popularity. So there's a couple of rules around building structures. You can build a structure in any territory that you control. So the way my board's set up right now, I could build a structure here, here, or here because I control those 3 spaces. If I had a mech over here, I could build into this territory too because I control that territory. Okay, so I can build a structure into any territory I can currently control. I could build a structure here. So let's say I'm building the mine here. And then in a later turn, I have a worker way over here and there's nobody here. I still am considered controlling this mine, and I can use this mine to transport myself back to this space because I'm considered still controlling this mine. And I'm controlling this area as long as I'm the only one that's there. As soon as a worker or a unit from another faction is in that space, I no longer control the territory. I could still use this mine if I wanted to, but I no longer control the territory. There is an exception to that rule. If I had built a mill here, I would, with nobody else here, it would still produce for me in this space. But as soon as another worker was over here, it would stop producing. It wouldn't do anything. It's not going to produce resources for them or for me. I still control the territory here. I'd still get the 1. If they controlled this territory, I would still get the 1. They would not get the popularity for the monument. Let's move on to the bolster action. In the bolster action, you pay 1 gold. You can either take a combat card or you can get 2 power. Let's say I'm going to take 2 power instead of the combat card. And again, the power is used during combat. And we'll talk about that in just a moment. So the last bottom action that you can take here is, in this card, it's an enlist. So I would have to pay 3 food. I don't have the 3 food, but let's just say I do. Again, remember, you're taking the food off of places that you have resources. So let's just say I've moved a little bit further along in the game and I have 3 food. I have 2 on this person and 1 on this person. So I'm taking 3, 2 from here and 1 from here. Taking the 3 food, turning that back in. And now I can enlist. And what enlisting does is it says I can remove one of these 4 recruits off of the bottom of my card. I also get 3 gold for doing this. So I would get a 3 gold coin. And I can enlist and take one of these off the bottom. So which one do I want to take? Let's say I'm taking let's say I'm taking this one, which is money. I could take any one of them that I want to. This can that I've taken off of there just sits off to the side. And I immediately gain that resource. I would immediately gain the gold, 1 gold, for opening that up. Now, this is where things get a little bit interesting in this game. Now that I have this opened up, anytime a player either on my left or my right would take this action, so they would deploy a mech. Anytime anybody deploys a mech that's on my left or on my right, I get gold. So I have to pay attention and watch to understand when somebody else is deploying a mech, because as soon as somebody else deploys that mech, I get gold for them deploying that mech. All of these work the same way. If I had taken this one instead, I would get power anytime somebody did an upgrade. In a 2-player game, which is what I'm setting up for, it's only the 1 player that's basically, in my case, across the table from me. I would only get the 1 gold. I could have gotten popularity, I could have gotten power, or I could have gotten combat cards. Now, one of the last things, since we're still on this board, one of the last things that I kind of want to talk about is this factory. If you get into the factory and you take control of the factory, then you get to take the 2 of these 3 factory cards, look at the card, look at the 2 cards, and decide which one you want to keep. Basically, what they'll do is add another thing to the side of your action board. So you can now take this action. For this card, I pay 2, I upgrade, and I get popularity points. And then for the bottom action, I move 2 spaces. This one's similar. I pay 2 gold. I can enlist somebody, and then I get a power point. Or I can move 2. For this card, I can pay 1 power, gain 3 gold, and then move 2. And it gives me another option. I now have 5 options, which, let me put this back out of the way so you can see my board once it's set up this way. I now have 5 options of where I can put my activity tracker. That's what the factory does. Once you go into the factory and you control the factory, you get to pick 2 of the cards that are over here and 2 of the cards that are in the factory space and keep 1. In a 2-player game, I put 3 cards out there, if you remember. So I get to look at 2, keep 1, put the other one back. If I'm there first, if I'm there second, the other player has looked at the top 2, kept 1, put it back. And so they know one of the 2 that I'm getting, but they don't know the last one. And I'm still going to look at 2 and pick and take 1 and keep it. So there's one more thing I want to cover before I move on to combat, and that is the stars. How do I get stars, or what do I do to get stars? If I deployed all 6 of my tech cubes, I can put a star there. If I've deployed all 4 of my mechs, I can put a star there. If I've deployed all 4 of my buildings, I can put a star there. If I have enlisted the recruits at the bottom, I put a star there. If I have 8 workers out, which is all of my workers, I could put a star there. So for this one, for this square, we have these objective cards. And let me go show you one of the objective cards real quick here. For this objective card, to achieve that objective, I have to have at least 3 of my structures built, 3 buildings built. And I have to have at least 7 on my popularity track and no mechs. If I meet those conditions, I can say I've met my objective, and I can put a star in that objective. You can only meet one of the two objectives. So as I was going through that, if I had done all of those things, I would have 6 stars out now. Not saying you're going to get all those things done. So then we have these 2 spaces are for combat. If I win combat, I can put it, the first time I win combat, I put it in this space. Second time I win combat, I put one in that space. So those are 2 stars I get for combat if I win combat. If I get to 18 on the popularity track, so if I get my popularity all the way up here to 18, I can put a star here, and the power, which is on the bottom corner. If I get all the way up to 16 on the power, I can get one there too. So you can do things like a bunch of bolster actions to get your power up, and or a bunch of trade actions where you're only getting your popularity up to try to get those up to get these stars. So again, any combination of these where you wind up with 6 stars out there, that's what triggers the end of the game. Somebody has 6 stars out here. So on the power track, you can see that the Saxons have 4 and the Nordics have 10. So that's where they're starting out at. And this is what the scenario looks like before the Nordic take a move action. So on the Nordics move action, they get to do 2 movement points because that's all they have right now. So they're going to move their character into this space, but that doesn't start combat because they still have 1 more movement point left. They're also going to move this mech into that space, and you can see this got really crowded really fast. So we now have a mech from both sides, the character from both sides. The Nordic have 2 workers and some resources, and the Saxons have 1 worker and some resources, and we're all piled into this one space. So now combat's going to happen. And I'm going to do the combat a little bit more open than it normally would be. But normally in combat, you would take your dial. Each team or each person in combat would take a dial. And it doesn't matter which dial you get, but you take a dial and you would keep it face down so that nobody else can see it. And then you would set a power number on here. Now, remember, I had said that the Nordics had 10 power. So the Nordics are going to decide that they're going to spend 7, which is the max they can spend. They're going to spend 7 of their 10 power on this fight. The Nordics have 1 combat unit in here, a mech. So they could add 1 combat card onto the wheel, and they would. So the Nordic player could tuck their card into the wheel like this, but they've decided that the 7 that they've chosen is enough, and they're not going to use any combat cards. So they have 7. This is the Nordic style. The Saxons have decided that they're going to spend all 4 of the power that they have. The Saxons have 2 combat units. The Nordic had 2 combat units too, so they could have used 2 cards too. But they decided not to because they're using the 7. The Saxons have 2 combat units in there, so they could use 2 also, but they've decided not to put the 2 in there. They're only going to set their dial at 4, which is all the power they have, and they're going to tuck a 3 into their dial from the combat card. At first, they're both face down on their side of the table like this, and then you flip them both at the same time. And as we can see, they've got 7. Now this 3 adds to the 4, so both sides have 7, which is a tie. But since the Nordics are the attackers, the Nordics actually win because they were the attacker, and the attacker wins ties. So the Saxons have to take their units, and their units will retreat back to their home base, which you can't see, it's off camera, but their home base like this for the Nordic. And now all these resources belong to the Nordic character because it was a tie, and they wind up winning. The Nordic have to move their popularity down 1. So we will look at the other track. So this track, the Nordic person spent 7. So they're down to 3 power. The Saxons spent all 4, so they're down to 0 power. After the battle, that's what the power track looks like. After the battle, the Nordic pushed back all of the Saxons to their home base, and because they pushed back a worker, they have to take 1 popularity point. They have to remove 1 popularity point. But because they won their first battle, they can put 1 star in the victory for winning 1 battle. I will tell you that I've played this game quite a bit, and there's usually not any combat in it. Might be the kind of people that I play with. You usually do not see, I usually do not see much combat in here. Usually where I see combat is here at the factory, because everybody's trying to get to the factory. Other than that, people seem to stay out of each other's way for the most part. Even if you chose to put a 0 on your dial and say, I wasn't going to put any power to this fight, you could still tuck cards based on how many units you have in there. And the worst thing that happens to you is if you put 0, you don't lose any power, and your people have to go back to your home base. The other thing that I miss saying is because the Saxons used at least 1 power, they would get to draw as a consolation prize. They get to draw 1 combat card to go in their thing. It's not because they played a combat card, it's because they used at least 1 power. If you remember when I was showing you the board up here, you can only get 2 combat stars. If you have a 3rd or a 4th combat, you don't get any more stars for those combats. You only get stars for the first 2 wins. So if that win would have made you place your 6th star, but you have other combat remaining on your turn, the game ends and your units would move back. So let's just say, instead of in that scenario, we were fighting something more like this. Let's just move these out of the way so I can show. This mech can move through here. So I moved this into here. I moved my leader into this space, and I moved this mech carrying these people out of the lake into this space. And then I did the combat, and I won combat in this space. If that was my 6th star that went down when I won this combat, and I get to choose which one of the 2 combats I do first, these would be moved back into the territory that they came from, and this combat would not be resolved. Because I put down the 6th star, I won. On the other side, if this person won and I went into this space like this, the same way would happen. If that would have been the Saxon in this fight, if the Saxon won the fight and these troops had to retreat, then in that case, if the Saxons placed their 6th star, this fight would still not happen, and they would retreat back to where they came from, because the 6 stars are down, game ends, this fight doesn't happen. If there's multiple combats that are going to go on, if any one of those combats resolve and give a player their 6th star, no more combat happens. The units that moved into an area to attack have to retreat. Because I have the Nordic out here, the Nordic can move through, with their seaworthy, they can move through water. And if I was fighting against somebody else who had the ability to move through water, I think it's the Polandia, you could have a fight here in the water. So, but I guess the point is you can have fights in the lake areas if you have the right factions. So for final scoring, we'll go through and figure out what everybody's score is. This pile of money is the Saxons, and this is the Nordics' money. When we're going through this, the first things we have to do, you're looking at this track right here, and the first thing is for each star, they get 5 gold. So the Nordic had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They're the reason why the game ended. So they have 6 stars at 5 apiece. That means they get 30 points for that, 30 gold. And the Saxons had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 at 5 gold apiece. So they get 25 added to their score. Then there's territories. We get 4 gold for each territory for each player, because they're both up here at the top end of the popularity. So the Saxons have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and the factory is worth 3, so that's 11. So they get 44. So I'll give them 45 and take one back. And the Norse have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This one doesn't count because it's home. So they also had 11 at the 4, so they get 44. So I'll do the same, give them 45 and take one back. Then we have resources. How many resources? For every 2 resources, they get 3 gold. So the Saxons have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. They have 13 resources. So that's 7 because you round up times the 3. So that's 21. So they get 21 gold. And the Norse have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. They have 8 pairs, so that's 4. So they have 4 times the 3, 12. So then we go into the structure bonus, which is this. So each structure they have on a farm or a tundra, which is oil producing or food producing, they get so many gold. So let's see. They have a structure on a town. They have a structure on tundra here. They have a structure on a town here and a town here. So they only have one structure on a tundra. So they get 2 gold for that. So 2 more gold for them. And then let's look at the Nordic. They have this on a farm. That's 1 on a farm. This is on a farm. That's 2 on a farm. This is on a town. This is on woods. So they have 2, so they get 4 gold. I'm going to do the same, give them 5 and take 1 back just to make things easier. So then we just have to total this up. Okay, this is pretty close. The Saxons got 125 and the Norse got 130. So 5-point difference. So the Nordic won. That's how you play Scythe.
Okay, final thoughts on Scythe. Scythe is a good area control, resource gathering kind of a game. There is some player interaction, but it's not high. The combat's fairly low. At least when I've played it, combat's fairly low. And even in the rulebook, the designer's notes say they really didn't expect this to be a combat-heavy game. Let's talk about build quality. The version of the game that I have was just picked up in retail. So these plastic figures that you saw during the teach, the plastic mechs, all the wooden meeples and wooden resources and buildings and stuff, that's all base game. So I think it's really good. The quality's really good. It is a Stonemaier game, so that kind of helps you with the quality is pretty good. I do have, and I showed it at the very beginning of the teach, the additional board that allows you to take the base board and expand it, which makes the hex tiles of the board almost twice the size. Not quite, but they're a lot bigger. And to me, that makes it easier when you've got a lot of different things trying to move around on the board. So I recommend buying that. I also have the Invaders from Afar, which adds 2 more factions. And so even if you're not playing with the 7 people, playing with what you have and then adding the 2 factions makes it so that more replayable. So I'd recommend adding the Invaders from Afar. I do not have the ships. I don't know how that plays. I haven't tried it. If somebody has it and wants to recommend a place for me to look and see what they look like, I would please leave me a comment and I'll try to take a look. So rating. I have My Little Scythe, which is a game for younger kids. This one I would give for younger kids. To me, this one's a 9. I really like playing it with my grandkids. For Scythe, if you have an adult audience, or at least kids that are 10 to 12, I would put this at a 9 too, because it's a really fun game to play. And like I said, for me at least, the combat's not the big part of the game. The bigger part of the game is how am I going to move around? How do I deal with the player board that I've gotten? and how do I build my territory out so that I can make the most money I can possibly make, and or put my stars down. So it's not a it's there isn't a lot of combat in it. If you play with somebody who wants to be combat heavy, they can make it combat heavy. But there's also things in the game that kind of limit that, that you only get 2 star, or you can only get a max of 2 stars for winning combat battles. You can go off and win 10, 20, whatever combat battles you want to, but you're depleting your own resources by doing that. And you can only get 2 stars. So there are a lot of other things you need to focus on other than just pure combat. So for me, that makes the game really nice, and I would rate it as a 9. Is this game for me? Well, it is a little complicated, and I've had people tell me that it's maybe too complicated for them. So if you've watched the video and you had a hard time with some of the things that I was teaching, then maybe it is too complicated for you, and okay. But I don't really think it's all that complicated if you get the right kind of teach and you play through it enough. Maybe play through 1 or 2 rounds with somebody over your shoulder explaining what they're supposed to do. I don't think it's all that bad. It's, to me, that's not all that complicated. It's not one of my heavier games. Um, so, but if you saw all that as complicated, then I agree, maybe it's not for you. If you're really looking for a game that is combat based, Axis and Allies, or something Risk type of a game, this is not that kind of game either, so it's not for you. If you're really interested in how do I build up my own little kingdom, my own little fiefdom, produce my own, produce the right kind of resources so that I can build better things to get more cash flow, to get a little bit of an engine building, a little bit of an engine going. It's not a huge engine builder, but there's a little bit of an engine build in it. Then maybe this one is for you. Oh, I didn't talk about pros and cons. So let's do the pros and cons. The cons. I guess I will put a con that the game is a little bit complicated. And in your first play, you may be just playing it to try to understand what it is you're supposed to do. One recommendation that I have for you, and that actually the instructions even had, is when people start placing stars, maybe the first star that goes down, or maybe after there's 2 or 3 stars down, you might want to go through a simulated end game scoring to see how you're doing. And that may help you focus on what are the right things for me to be doing. And I do agree, so this is all part of that con, that it takes you a good play or two before you really get into the swing of exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. So this game may be a little complicated to people. There is a little bit of, I've seen people get stuck in some analysis paralysis trying to figure out, well, what's the right thing for me to do? And so I've seen some of that analysis paralysis. And to me, that's a little bit of a con. There is a little bit in this game that has something for you to do while somebody else is taking their turn. On your player board, once you get all your enlists done, you'll get popularity or resources, gold, whatever, based on what somebody else is doing. So there's a little bit of things to be done on another player's turn there, but there's not a lot. So when you get somebody stuck in analysis paralysis, there can be a large time, especially playing with 7 players. There can be a large time gap between when you take your turn and the next time you have to really do anything, unless there's some combat or something going on. That sounds like a lot of cons, but it's kind of nitpicky cons. The pros for the game is that, at least for me, it's really engaging, trying to figure out what other people are doing and watching them take their turn so that I can understand what they're trying to do and figure out how that might impact me, or are they heading my way over this direction? And I have to figure out how to guard that flank, because even though there's not a lot of combat in the game, for me, one of the reasons why there might not be a lot of combat is if you have your self defended well and you have a lot of power, people don't tend to want to attack you. So there is that, nuclear deterrent kind of an option there, right? I'm strong enough that if you attack me, you may not win. And so that balance of being powerful but not too powerful, but watching my resources and watching where my people are. And then the fact that each one of the factions play a little different makes it so that I want to go back in and try this one. Oh, this character gets to go across lakes. That's kind of cool. That's different. Or this one gets to go from the town straight into the factory. Well, that's huge. So, you know, the different factions play a little bit differently. Each one of the boards, the player boards, play a little differently. So that gives me some more replayability. And so I see those things as pros because of the replayability. I've sat and played a game and then had people sit there and go, I want to play that again, but I want to play as this faction and maybe this board, this player board instead this time, just to see how that works. I see the asymmetric factions and the asymmetric player boards as a plus. I really think it feels good when you're playing the game. I don't know how to put that into words, but the quality of the pieces, the the player boards, the indentations in the player boards to put your pieces into, and that give you this nice tactical feel. I don't know how much of a pro that should really be, but watching somebody get up on popularity and saying, oh no, they're more popular than me, what do I have to do? Or they have more power than me, do I care? What do I have to do? Should I do anything about that? The fact that, and this is kind of maybe maybe interesting for only me, but the fact that if I get my popularity up to 18, I can start spending my popularity, because once I got that star at 18, I never lose the star. Even if my popularity goes back, that plummets back down to 0, I can start spending my popularity for other things like on the explore cards and stuff like that. So I don't know, the strategies that are in there keep the game interesting and keep it different for me. Okay, I think that's long enough, more than long enough. I hope you can tell, I do enjoy the game. I don't get to play it as often as I'd like to. Okay, with all that said, I hope you enjoy playing games. I hope you enjoyed this video. I enjoy making them. Keep playing games, and I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye.